the rhetoric, I am just mentioning it, I am not trying to talk about a person, this is the rhetoric, that's the idea. It is necessary to examine the processes and experiences of war and peacetime. See, this is important. There are similarities between violence during the war and during the peacetime, if you look at it. Okay, murder, rape, probably what you can see that. And can new patterns of violence during peacetime be linked to the experiences of war, we must ask. It is. In fact, research show that. Okay, I'll get to that shortly. Violence must be understood in the political and the social context. We can't just focus on violence alone as a singular phenomenon. Okay, that is what's happening apparently. They just focus on that, or child abuse, or rape, or this, that. It has to be looked at in the total context. Post-conflict violence, I have looked at in several countries that have had experiences of conflict, sometimes long-term conflict, 20, 30-year conflict as well. And generally, all the research done, every publication shows that the post-conflict violence can be linked to disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. I'll get to those shortly, how it happens. And some of them can be categorized as political. Spoilers use violence strategically to undermine peace. Okay, that comes from Charles Tilly. And then state actors, violence by the state actors against perceived enemies. Then there's economic type violence, robbery, extortion, kidnapping, prostitution, drugs, sometimes to eliminate or scare off their competitors. And then there are just ordinary criminals who commit crimes against fellow community members for power play, gangs, turf wars, those things. So there are all these different types of violence for different reasons. Okay? That's why I said you can't just look at that just a single phenomenon, something, and then blame the government or whatever for everything. So we have to look at the post-war societies. In post-war societies, crime is influenced, violence is influenced by many exogenous factors. Exogenous meaning, in this case, outside of the government's control, outside. It is not what something that government can directly do or not do. There are certain effects that take place in post-conflict countries, societies. So these are effects outside of the government's crime policy. Okay? These are outside of the crime policy. Economic stress, outside of the crime policy. Political legitimacy, outside, I'll explain again these one by one, outside of the crime policy. Family disorganization, outside of the crime policy. Others, age, drugs, and change in routine activities. All these, what I am saying, are based on very well published research. Okay, well published, well accepted research, peer reviewed research. Economic stress. Economic stress undermines legitimacy and weakens social bonds. Some of the theories that address this, I am not going to explain this, so I have to go quite quickly. Okay, social disorganization. I have given the names of the theories, etc. There. Social strain, social disorganization. Disorganization of the family, etc. There are children without parents, and parents without children, and mothers without husbands, husbands without wives. Very briefly. Okay, social strain. That is after a war, development takes place. Rapid development. With the rapid development, what happens is social strain. That is, you find that you see all these new things are there now, all kinds of goods now. Okay, nice TV, cell phones, whatever, right? Various things. You can get a motorcycle, car. You see all different things. Some things come into the market, and you want them, but you don't have the ability. You have those needs. They are here. You want this, but your abilities are somewhere here. So when your abilities are somewhere here, your needs are up there. According to the strain theory, what happens is it causes strain because there's the needs, here's the abilities. So if you graph it really, if you put it in a graph, I can't do it here. It looks like a letter J. So in the letter J, here's the bottom. So here's the this is where your ability is, but this is where your needs are. So when that causes strain, then what happens? People, since you can't achieve what you need legitimately, you try to achieve them illegitimately, committing crimes, in other words. Okay, that's one crime theory. Also, it causes violent subcultures, conflict, that is a Marxist perspective, and macroeconomics, etc. Okay. Anyway, let me go over fast. Sorry. Okay. However, there's a paradox. How do we explain rising crime rates during post-war accelerated development periods when there is plenty to go? That's a question people ask always. If that is, then how can there be crime, right? If you say that they say, they even write in the newspaper, the president says this is the Asia's wonder, this country, then how can all these things are happening? You probably read those. Okay. Explanation. Crime trends are dependent on specific economic stress measures. Economic stress measures fall into two categories. There are absolute measures, which are poverty, median income, unemployment. But then there are relative measures, relative deprivation, income inequality, inflation. These are the these also affect these economic stress measures. The relative measures also affect crime trends. So it's not something that the government can definitely immediately do anything about. Okay, next point, legitimacy. Max Weber defines legitimate power or authority as the probability that certain commands or all commands from a given source will be obeyed by a given group of persons. This is a very well accepted definition from Max Weber, and adds that a basic criterion of legitimate power is a minimum of voluntary submission. So there has to be a minimum of voluntary submission, otherwise it's not legitimate. That's why a dictatorship is not considered legitimate, because the submission is not voluntary. Okay? Legitimizing process, explaining and justifying laws and social rules to new members and succeeding generations. That is what we do in our families. We teach our children, then the grandparents to our children, and teachers teach students, and so on and so forth. It has to be done. That is how this legitimizing process goes on from generation to generation. And whether that has stopped at a certain time, whether some people are not subjected to that, these are the questions we have to ask. Crime rates may be related to trends in legitimacy of political institutions. Protests, riots, breakdown. You see that all these are happening, right? Protests, riots, breakdown of law and order, community tensions, anomie meaning hopelessness, strain. All these are positively related to social breakdown. With the social breakdown, these things happen. With social breakdown, informal social controls such as family, work, school, and voluntary organizations become unable to channel individuals to comply with conventional behavior. Why? Because families, maybe single parent family, mother goes to work, there's no one to guide take care of the children, or children come from school, they are alone, they are home alone, right? Or children go to various, or there are no parents, maybe, or there are so many things that I don't have time, but anyway, so you get the basic idea. The result is antisocial behavior, crime, and collective action. This is Durkheim. I cited Durkheim because Durkheim was a 19th century jurist and French jurist, and I cite him because even from that time it was like that. So this is not something new. That's why I cited Durkheim, just to show that. This is not just today or yesterday. Resource mobilization theories. They discredit, they say collective action is different. They say collective action requires both access to resources and the development of a well-defined organizational structure. Without that, it won't happen. So when there is social disorganization, collective action don't necessarily happen, they say. Social disorganization causes crime and collective political unrest. Collective political unrest declines due to lack of resource. So if there is lack of resource mobilization for the group who wants to organize, then of course collective action declines. Okay, that is, so the steps that the police law enforcement must take is to make sure that resource mobilization, you try to take it away. Okay, that's the idea. So it can't be, you don't have to necessarily do it with a gun or whatever. Okay, how to measure? Okay, legitimacy. Then there's a question: how do you measure legitimacy? Legitimacy can be measured. This is how it is done usually. We ask the question, we find out whether do people trust the government to do what is right. So we can ask that question. right? Do you trust your government to do what is right? And in fact, in the United States, for a long time, there was very low legitimacy because people didn't trust that their government would do the right thing. And but since beginning with the 1970s, now it has been rising, and during the Clinton administration, it rose to a higher point that the government can do what is right, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay. It also depends, of course, we have to be very careful in measuring. It depends on the attitude of the people toward political institutions and leaders. The attitudes may be dependent upon perceptions than reality. So, as regards legitimacy, if we look for the people, whether they do trust their government, we have to be very careful in measuring, because it may be influenced by the attitudes. Attitudes are dependent upon perceptions rather than reality. Perceptions can be created by media, campaigns, all kinds of things. Okay. All right, family disorganization. Families help regulate crime rates. Okay. I'll move on from this. You got the basic idea is there, so instead of explaining what I have done there is explaining all that. How families shield their children from violence, from crime, and etc. That's the idea. Individuals with no family connections, single parent families, women in labor force, children and youth spend more time away from family, maybe in school, maybe in tuition classes, maybe home alone. All these contribute to crime. Okay. Another one is public policy. Public policy wise, police community relations are extremely important. One of the things is community oriented policing, the role of police. Then deterrence, swift and sure punishment. Just because the higher punishments are there does not mean it deters unless it is swift and sure. Okay. Because research shows again and again, death penalty does not deter unless the death penalty is swift and sure. Okay. Incarceration, education and welfare, attachment to school, success in school, inculcating aspirations for higher achievement, monitoring and supervision. So, the schools can do a lot to reduce crime rates in that way. Okay. Welfare can reduce. So, you can see it's not something that the government or the police or whatever, the Ministry of Security, whatever can do alone. There's a big role to play by the society, by families, by churches, by temples, by parents, by, okay. All right. Now, ahistoricism. Ahistoricism, what does that mean? That is when we separate theory and history. This happens a lot. There's a tendency to treat social processes as if they are independent of history. That's going on right now when people talk about good governance, rule of law, violent crime. Take even in Sri Lanka, they take it as if this is ahistoric, just happens now. You forget the history completely. Has the history had anything to do with it? Nobody asks, nobody wants to find out. Okay, everybody say, oh no, the war is now over, this is now. Right? And treating time as ahistoric, focusing on the present without regard to history. They ignore external events and relationships. They assume that relationships between independent and dependent variables are consistent over a given measure of time, that particular time period. So that's wrong. Post-war crime across cultures I looked at, different cultures, different countries. Criminal decision making by individuals as responses to their social, economic and political environment. External, so this is one of the things that I found, and also external factors, they have to be analyzed in the historical context in order to understand the post-war crime, even across cultures, even in other countries. Research shows considerable variation in crime wavelengths. In some countries, after conflict, there was an upswing of crime. In some countries, there was a downswing of crime. In others, it was stagnated. Okay, there was nothing, not more, not less. And so we have to know why and how and what are the reasons. And so I looked at whether relationships between crime and I got really interested in this because law and order issues, good governance, rule of law in that sense. Okay, so we can't just get these from the law books alone. Right? So are there relationships between crime and exogenous factors? Are these symmetrical or asymmetrical? Longitudinal studies over a long period of time show symmetrical relationship between age, and this has never been disproven. This has been shown to be true always. There's a direct relationship between age and crime, the highest crime committing age is between 18 to 20.